Hotline.
You are listening to 888 Hotline. Hello, I'm Stephanie, and I'm so happy to be here with you today. A little disclaimer in Spanish for our Spanish speaking audience. Hola, hola, bellezas. Están escuchando 888 Hotline. El episodio de hoy va a ser en inglés, pero vamos a tener subtítulos en español si nos están viendo por video en Spotify or YouTube. I am really excited to be back with you guys on this new season of 888 Hotline. We are here to unlock your next level, to reach our maximum potential. And that's why we have a lineup of amazing guests this season. And I am especially excited to introduce today's guest, Kim Polinder. And let me share with you a little bit about Kim. Kim Polinder is a relationship coach, a podcast host, and a founder of the Polinder Coaching Group. She has over 550,000 followers all across social media, and she has a background in spiritual psychology and mental health counseling. Kim is transforming the way individuals approach relationships. Today, we're going to be focusing on attachment styles and overcoming communication challenges. Kim will give us powerful strategies for building healthier relationships, whether these are romantic, familial, or platonic. Without further ado, I'm excited to introduce Kim. Hi, Kim, and welcome to 888 Hotline. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and talk to you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself for the listeners that have not been familiar with you. Who is Kim? How did you get into this practice? Tell us a little bit about your backstory.
Yeah, well, I most of my career was in IT engineering, and then I switched over to, I guess, therapy, counseling, coaching, and a little bit later in life. So I come from a very left brain kind of logical perspective in life, but I've always been curious about personality types and how the mind works. It's kind of related to engineering of how things work, getting to the root cause of problems. So I found a very deep interest in psychology. I didn't choose it in college, although I wanted to. And I just decided to make the shift when I decided that IT was no longer fulfilling my life's purpose. So kind of came into it by very conscious choice and effort.
So, Kim, I found you through a video on TikTok. The video had about 4 million views, so I'm sure you actually touched many people and many hearts. And you were talking about triggers and attachment styles in this relationship. And in this podcast, we've talked a lot about attachment styles, but I would love if you could give us the Cliff Note version of what attachment styles are, just to give context to our general audience.
Sure. Yeah. Attachment is how we become attached and love others and receive love. It starts very early in life, generally in the first 0 to 5 years of life, where as you learn to attach to a parent, we've noticed that those kinds of patterns and how that got seeded follow you into adulthood as to how you get attached to others. So there are three general categories of insecure attachment. One might be you're a little more avoidant. So these are the people in the world who will shut down in a big argument. They'll walk out of the room. They will not get engaged. They'll just almost become overwhelmed and quiet. They're less expressive, shall we say. Then we have another big general category of more of the anxious type, where they are the ones who in an argument will chase after the avoiders. They want to talk things through now. They hate silence.
Mhm.
They hate separation. They don't want to take a break. They get more and more anxious the more time that is, you know, uh,
Yeah.
left without resolving things. And then there's a third category that actually most people are in, especially if you've had any sort of trauma, especially if you had an environment where you didn't really talk about feelings growing up and you just didn't know how to navigate your feelings. And so that fearful avoidant, they might lean more towards avoidant traits, might also have some anxious traits. And so those people generally have two types where on a given day or the person that they're engaging with, they might notice that, oh, sometimes I'm more avoidant, sometimes I'm more anxious.
Mhm.
So those are generally the three types in relationships that show up.
So you said something interesting. You mentioned childhood, and that's where my next question goes to. When we hear about attachment styles,
the majority of the time we hear on how they're formed early on in childhood, how it starts with your primary caregiver and the relationship or the bond that you formed with them. But something that I've always been curious about is how much can attachment styles change throughout life, especially adulthood? Do our relationships, whether these be platonic, um, amorous relationships, or with our family, do they also affect and change the way we attach ourselves or form relationships in our adulthood?
For sure, they can change. It is difficult for it to change without a lot of concerted effort because we just so naturally fall into our childhood patterns of attachment where, let's say for the anxious type, they're going to come into a relationship with a certain lens of people are going to leave me. People are don't care about me. Are you mad at me? You know, that these are common things that anxious attached people say a lot. And so with that lens, they're going to tend to notice evidence that confirms that lens. So, for sure, with a lot of personal work, maybe you have a therapist, a coach, or someone in your life that can help you be aware of this lens. You start to work towards reframing situations. You see someone as, okay, maybe their actions could have been interpreted as something other than rejection. Maybe they were actually stuck in traffic and didn't mean to be late. And maybe they are prioritizing me. Maybe there is evidence I can find to kind of challenge the lens that I have. Same thing with avoidant people, you know, like, oh, you're going to be too much. Oh, you're never going to be happy with me. I can't even take this anymore. My mother was unhappy. And then they just dip out. And so being aware of your own patterns is the first step to moving towards a secure attachment style. You have to know what you're starting with and what your starting point is. And then you can move towards secure attachment. But the final piece that would more solidify you developing a different attachment style is having a person in your life who can get into the lab with you, where they are patient with you, where they give you loving reactions, where they can walk you through times when you're traumatized and triggered and you say something you might regret, but they're patient and forgiving. And then through that process of with this lab partner, you can then more easily develop secure attachment. Otherwise, it's just all in your mind. Like, yeah, I know what I should do, but without actually practicing it, you won't really move permanently into more of a secure attachment.
That's a great way of saying it, a lab partner. Because in
Yeah. We all
reality,
need
we're all
practice. Yeah.
experiments. Yeah, in love.
Yes.
We were not born knowing all of this. So
Correct.
the fact that you're being able to be vulnerable with the person that you love, and you're like, hey, I am anxiously attached. I do not want to be like this anymore. I want to be more secure, but guess what? It's not going to come really easy to me. And I need you to be able to be patient and hear me. And I will do the same for you because I'm sure they also have their issues in a way. That's a beautiful way of
Yes.
saying it.
Yeah, because more avoidantly attached people mistakenly assume that they're more zen, they're not so emotional and expressive
Yeah.
and, oh, they're more calm, they're more healthy. It's like, no, 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 that's not what's happening. On the
Yeah.
inside, they're just as emotionally dysregulated as we say. They're just as unhealthy. Being quiet does not mean you're healthy.
Great way of putting it. I want to talk a little bit about dating apps. I feel like right now they're so common, dating apps in this world.
Yeah.
It's a very usual way how couples meet nowadays and form relationships. Have you noticed in your work any new patterns that are starting to develop because of these dating apps? Are people becoming more anxious or more avoidant? Do you see any correlation between both?
I think the starting point is still the same. So you're going to come
Hmm.
into adulthood with whatever attachment style you have. The dating apps I think, exacerbate, like, just make it more intense of what your attachment style is. For example, for the anxiously attached, it's easier to get freaked out about someone who doesn't respond to you right away in a message, someone
Yep.
who kind of breadcrumbs you, someone who might
Yeah.
actually gaslight you. And it's done so impersonally because people are behind a phone where maybe in person they wouldn't be so cruel, but you add that technology layer in between, and now all of a sudden people can ghost at the drop of a hat when they would never do that in person. Same thing with an avoidant. It makes it so much easier to dip out of the conversation, to not have mature follow through and deep conversations. And so I wouldn't say that it's created different attachment styles. I'd say it just intensifies whatever attachment style you have.
That makes complete sense. A lot of the videos on your social media are talking about regulating or emotional regulation. And you give a lot of tools for connections and tools to manage our triggers. And that's where the next section of the podcast I want to focus it on. Um, I like the phrase rewiring emotional responses. And like you said, a lot of this comes with awareness, whether that is
Yes.
with your therapy or self awareness of really being able to understand what goes in your inner world. I have said it a million times here. I am an anxiously attached person. I am trying to work through a lot of my triggers. But sometimes I think, even though I understand what my triggers are, I still find it hard to not get triggered in the moment that it's happening. Do you have any tools, or do you think it is even possible to rewire that emotional responses that we have to those triggers?
This is a great question because when we can become more comfortable with the truth of who we are, such as like, you know what, I'm more anxiously attached or I'm more avoidantly attached, and we can add this element, Gabor Mate talks about this a lot, this compassionate inquiry, where, some people don't even want to talk about childhood. But if we just touch on childhood, it might make you feel less broken, less crazy. Whereas let's take the average anxiously attached person. You probably grew up in a home where there was at least one avoidant parent for sure. And by avoidant, I mean someone who didn't really check in or know how to talk about feelings. A lot of times, parents, they mean well, they're so loving, they put food on the table, but they just don't know how to talk you through your feelings. It could have been something more overt where you were criticized when you were expressive and emotional. You were
Mhm.
felt that you were broken, like everyone else is so calm. Why am I such a problem? And you start to develop this perspective, this narrative about yourself of that, I'm just so poor, or this person's going to reject me at the drop of a hat. So the fact that you get triggered is not a problem. Perspective is everything. And when you have the perspective that, oh no, I got triggered. Oh no, I had a bad thought. Uh, Here I am broken again. First of all, getting triggered, not a problem. Viktor Frankl talks about there's a space in between the time something happens and how you react to it. So moving towards secure attachment doesn't mean you don't get triggered. It talks about, it indicates how you react to your triggers. When you get triggered that someone hasn't texted you in a few hours, or they haven't texted you all day, or they haven't said I love you, they haven't planned a date night, how do you, and you talk yourself through it and say, okay, let's look at the actual evidence. What are other ways that they are dedicated to me, that they are prioritizing me? What is a way I can express my needs without living in this private hell of like, do they love me? Having those open
Mhm.
conversations. So compassionate inquiry is just so critical to moving towards secure attachment, coming into more acceptance of why you are anxiously attached, that it's totally understandable why you would be, that it's not a problem, that there are people who are not uh, turned off by it, that you can find someone who can work with you through it and be understanding. So, just the perspective that you have of yourself and the fact that you get triggered will more easily help you, initiate tools. And so, what the actual tools could be is something like, there's something simple. You could do the pause, breathe, and name it. That's one of the methods where, okay, you're triggered. You're feeling like someone's going to reject you. Someone's mad at you, right? Pause, breathing. So when you get triggered, it's a very physical response. And we want to first address the physical response because it's like adrenaline's pumping, your nervous system is a wreck. Breathing, if you do yoga, that sort of deep breathing, the box breathing, long breaths in, hold it, long breath out, because now you're just helping address like the physical response. Then once you get a little more regulated in breathing, now you can move towards something like CBT. What's the belief behind it? What's the narrative? Name the emotion. I'm feeling rejected because this person hasn't texted me. My boyfriend hasn't texted me in a day, you
Mhm.
know? And just start to talk through your experience and validate that experience. So those are just some tools, as far as regulation itself, like I said, breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, you can, Google that. There are lots of meditations on that. Five things in the room, like pick out five blue things in the room, name just five objects in the room, just anything like that that can just kind of walk you through that time period where you are in that visceral response. So there's physical and then there's mental that you have to contend with.
Like breaking that spiral basically that we all go
Yes.
through. And
Yep.
like naming
Yep.
the objects in the room makes you feel present in the moment instead of being in your head where we spiral a
Yes.
lot.
Yes.
You mentioned compassion in your answer, and I want to go a little bit back to that because I think, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners will relate, I am very self critical, especially after I've had an anxious trigger. And I will sit in bed for hours thinking of all the things I could have done differently. And you hear the negative self talk in my head because it's not like, oh, maybe you could have done this differently next time. It's like, no, why are you not even capable of doing this? Do you believe that this self criticism is a common obstacle people have in order to become a bit more secure?
For sure. For sure. That self-criticism, it'll just keep you in inertia. It'll keep you
Yeah.
in just like low self-esteem. And so that compassionate curiosity is the key. A lot of times we're so quick to jump into judgment rather than
Hmm.
being curious. Like, for instance, if I were to ask you, like, did you in that moment make a conscious decision to just be completely ineffective, to be just like the most pitiful person you could, to be like the worst friend possible, whatever the judgment is, the worst
Yeah.
partner possible. Did you decide to do that in that moment? It's like, no. So then you were doing the best that you could in that moment. Well, yeah. People always say like, I could have done better, but you couldn't. And the test for that, the logic behind that is, did you consciously say, I'm going to do the worst possible thing I
Yeah.
can right now? Like, no. In any moment, when you just really sit with that idea, I'm doing the best I can in any moment. And if someone else grew up with the home environment you did, with the parent
Hmm.
that you did, with the lack of emotional attunement that you did, would
Hmm.
they be reacting in a better way than you? No, they wouldn't. So, this curiosity, understanding like I can see why you did what you did. Uh, Protection is the number one reason generally, protecting yourself, needing reassurance. So you needed reassurance. Oh, you're such a bad person for needing reassurance. Again, with your
Oh,
life, it's understandable why you might need a little extra reassurance than, let's say, someone else who grew up with a lot of reassurance from their parents. If you didn't grow up with that, why would you just have this natural source of reassurance for yourself? Like you wouldn't.
oh,
So compassion and curiosity are just key factors where you can actually sit with yourself and have more motivation for being able to improve and grow.
beautifully said. Thank you. One of the videos I saw on your page is talking about how some couples will sometimes have the same argument over and over and over again, and it's almost these never-ending cycle. Um, do you have any tips on how to break that pattern and to remove both yourself but also de-escalate the conflict when things are at an all-time high with your partner?
The first step is to understand what triggers you are bringing to the equation. So we need to understand your lens. So let's take the conversation or the argument of, okay, whenever we sit down to dinner or go on a date night, my partner always has their phone out. It's like, can you just put the phone down for 1 minute? So understanding why this is a trigger for you, of what was your home environment like growing up? Were you often neglected? Emotional neglect is a huge thing. It doesn't mean that parents are being mean to you. It could be
No.
that both parents had to work outside the home. It could be, again, that they didn't know how to talk about your feelings with you. But that emotional neglect and that loneliness is something that has probably been there for your whole life. So just not feeling prioritized. Just understand what lens, what guilty until proven innocent mindset you bring to the situation. For the other person who's picking up the phone, it's like maybe they're a workaholic. Maybe they feel they always need to overachieve. For men, depression often goes unnoticed because men, when they're depressed, a lot of times they're working a lot. So maybe they're depressed. Maybe that's the root. What are they depressed about? I don't know what it is. But this feeling of, okay, now someone's unhappy with me. What what home did you grow up in where one parent was not consolable? One parent always took up all the emotions in the room, and there was no space for your emotions, and you're just kind of over it, and you just want to like tune them out. So, first, understanding what your triggers are and being able to share that with each other so that you know your starting point, you know their starting point, and then we move into, okay, so we know why we're triggered. What is the need that you have? And this is where, if you have empathy, if you have compassion with you and your partner, you can move towards compromise of like, okay, I get that work is very important to you. Can we put it down for 15 minutes when we eat? Can we put it down for the whole meal? What are other ways that your partner is prioritizing you that you can acknowledge to them? You know, what are ways that, your partner isn't being ridiculous and overwhelming to you that you can acknowledge for them? And so, but the starting point is understanding the lens so that you can move towards, okay, what does the solution look like? Because with repeated
think we're
arguments, resentment is going to be such a key thing that that couple is navigating.
Definitely. I think what I'm hearing here is a pattern of being compassionate, right? And being curious about your partner. Why are they doing that? And not just assuming, oh, it's because I'm not interesting. It's because they think work is more important than me. There's always a reason behind something. So instead of going in with an attack, which we usually do because it's easy, right? It's easy if we're doing it based on our very limited lens. Instead, if we ask, there might be a deeper answer there or a different answer than the one you were
Yes.
expecting.
Yes, exactly. And we so quickly move into defensiveness. We're constantly defending the fact that we're a good person to our partner. No, I'm not complaining because I'm a bad
Yes.
person. I'm complaining because, this. I'm not a bad person for picking up my phone because I'm providing for the family or this and that. I've got so many pressures. Like, we're just defending our honor. And so if couples can learn tools such as mirroring, empathy exercises, finding ways to help your partner feel understood. Once a partner feels understood, you become so much more agreeable. It's like, okay, I understand. But when you don't feel understood, it's like people like digging their heels, like, nope, I'm not going to move to a solution. I'm not going to compromise. And it's just World War III. So,
So right. And you also always end up defending yourself. And at
yes,
that point, it stops being even about what you were fighting about and ends up being
yes,
about if you're a good person for even being here.
yeah,
Kim, thank you so much. This has been great. And I don't want to take up all of your time because I do want to give our listeners an opportunity
sure.
to ask you some questions. So I think we have time for two questions, and I have two great questions here. I'll play the first one.
Hi, Fefi. I'm Andreina. I'm from Venezuela and I live in Houston. I love your podcast. Thanks God you come back. So, this is my situation. My father provided me everything: education, food, clothing, and a safe home. Everything. But he had a very explosive temper. Growing up, I believed that the marriage were full of arguments and emotional outbursts, which made me afraid of making mistakes. Through therapy, I have learned that conflict can be handled with respect. Now, I'm focusing on loving my dad while setting healthy boundaries to protect myself. So, my question is, what strategies can I use to communicate effectively during conflict without falling into fear or avoidance? Thank you.
So she wants to know if you have any tips or tricks that she can use during conflict to communicate effectively without shutting down, because it's her
Mm,
instinct to do so.
yeah. First of all, the fact that it's her father and family versus, a current partner, um, it it brings up this topic that I think is important to highlight, and that is when it comes to processing and healing from family, it's very difficult, especially with parents, because
Yep.
we fall into this false dichotomy where we think that, uh-oh, if I say anything that I'm dissatisfied with my father, I'm insulting him, I'm disrespecting him, I'm not being grateful. He put food on the table, I never wanted for anything, I had clothes on my back, like, like everything was fine. Yeah, he got angry once in a while, but so children, all children, not just this viewer, but all children have trouble really holding what we call is a dual awareness. So more than one awareness. Competing emotions is another way to phrase it, where you love your father, you respect and admire him, such a good man, such a hard worker, such a good provider. And there were times when his anger really made you scared, really made you feel lonely, really made you feel wrong, like broken, like, ugh, I really made him angry. I felt responsible for his anger. This is how a child's brain would work. I felt
Mhm.
responsible for pushing him to that edge. So it's important to be able to know that you will always preserve that love. And it's great that she's in therapy, that she can then process this other stuff with her therapist, knowing that this will never be threatened. Now, when it comes to practical tools, it's great that she's learning boundaries. With someone with anger issues, it sounds like she already has some natural compassion. Like, I get it. He probably had an angry parent. He learned that this is, blah, blah, blah. He's lived a life that he felt that has been very unfair, not just. And this is where a lot of anger issues come from, is like, this is not fair. So she has compassion, right? But he's not allowed to talk to her like that. So her therapist has probably given her ways of saying, one thing in the moment will be understanding that physical reaction she'll have whenever he yells at her, whenever anyone actually, a loved one yells at her, it could be a future partner, she is going to have that visceral reaction. So that whole pause, breathe, name it um, exercise, that'll be a good one for her to practice. A pause, breathing, naming, like, I feel fearful right now because my father's whatever. I feel sad right now that my father's yelling at me. I feel anxious because I think I did something wrong. Just being able to name it like that. And then when it gets into the, okay, now we need to draw the boundary. Hey, time out, dad. Uh, I don't appreciate the way you're talking to me. I want to talk to you, but I can't talk to you when you're like this. So I'm going to step out of the room, or I'm going to hang up the phone, and I'll call you later because I do want to talk to you, but this isn't acceptable for me. So just learning what your boundary is, communicate it, and take a break. Now, the biggest challenge for avoidance when they take a break is like, oh yeah, I could do that. I can ask for a break. The problem is they never come back. They're
Yeah.
like, oh, I'll just leave that alone.
Yeah.
So
Eventually.
real growth is being able to actually pick up the phone and say, "Hey, Dad, do you want to talk about what happened?" Versus like, "Ooh, maybe I'll just avoid the family for a couple of weeks." That's the biggest challenge for an avoidant. Is like they love breaks all day long. They love hearing that they're allowed to take
Yeah.
breaks, but then they never come
Yeah.
back. So that's going to be her biggest challenge, is like initiating the conversation again.
Great advice. Kim, I got this question asked, I don't know how many times. It was like our most asked question, so I'm excited for you to give us an answer. And all my anxiously attached viewers, listeners that are struggling with their avoidant partner, and they
Mhm.
are in this very common loop that seems to happen. It seems that anxiously and avoidant attached people are almost like magnets to each other. And they
Yes.
end up in a loop, and the avoidant triggers the attached, and the anxious, and the anxious triggers the avoidant, and it's almost never ending. So our listeners want to know, one, is there any world where anxiously attached and avoidant attached people work out in a relationship? And what are the tools, or what is the best advice you can give these couples in order to have a more, or end up being a more secure partnership?
There's first of all, awareness from both sides. So a
Mhm.
lot of times avoidants don't always like to acknowledge their avoidant side. They like to
Yeah.
take the higher road, like, oh, you're so emotionally dysregulated. You're so emotional right now. Like, you need to work on this. You need therapy, right? It's like, yeah, that goes both ways. So if both sides can say, hey, you know what? We have these patterns. This is why the pattern came up. If the avoidant person, the thing is that avoidant people generally aren't great at empathy, expressing understanding, communicating through it. The thing that will help them achieve this the quickest is if they get in touch with their own feelings. If they acknowledge
Yeah.
that, oh yeah, I did have that parent who was really emotional. I did have that parent who I was kind of scared of. I did have that parent who I couldn't console, particularly if the viewer has a male partner. Little boys, when they feel ineffective, it's very emasculating as men. And this is just something across the board, whether you're avoidant or
Yeah.
not. Men need to feel that they are effective in making you happy. If they feel that they are ineffective in making you happy, they will start to withdraw. You're never
Yes.
happy. You always complain. Can't you see the good things in life? Look at our life. What is so bad? The biggest nightmare for a husband is to have a wife who is never happy. Biggest nightmare for a wife is to have a husband who doesn't provide and protect. But we won't go there today. So, this whole avoidant anxious thing, just know that this is a very deep wiring. You're never going to become the opposite. It's not just going to be a clean jump. You're always going to be a little avoidant. You're always going to be a little anxious. Again, it's all what you do with it, where you want to move a little bit towards the middle. But what I've noticed the biggest progress will be is if that avoidant partner will acknowledge that, you know what, I do have some issues with my childhood, with those emotional people. If they can see their partner as, oh, wait, that's not my mother, that's not my father, this is my partner, and not put that lens on them. If the anxious person can acknowledge that, okay, avoidance, they're not more healthy than me. That's what drives anxious people crazy, is like they feel
Mhm.
they're the crazy ones because the avoidant is
Yeah.
so like zen. It's like, what's wrong with
Mhm.
me? But realizing that, hey, your avoidant has just as much to work on as you. And to understand that if people avoid when they feel they are ineffective, when they feel they're a failure to you. So it's not that they're saying, you're a mess, get away from me. When they hear you complain, they constantly feel more and more that, oh my goodness, I'm a failure. I can't make you happy. I'm defective. So it's a big, big insecurity for avoidant people. And I think if more anxious people knew this and recognized this, they would feel less like they're the broken ones in the relationship.
Yeah.
So, but learning to communicate, learning the resentment of the avoidant that hasn't been expressed, that needs to be
Mhm.
expressed, and finding out what they feel they have been communicating. That's always curious for the anxious person to hear, like, what? You feel you communicate with me? So, it takes two. That's all I'll say.
This has been incredible. Thank you so, so much for your wisdom, for sharing it. Please let us know where we can find you, your socials. Everything will be linked in the bio, but please share with us where we can find you.
Yeah, I guess Instagram, KP_counseling. So if you have the links in the bio, I'm
Yeah.
on TikTok as well. It's right now it's just the same content. So it kind of depends on what format, what platform you prefer. I'm also on YouTube, but I do plan on posting longer content on YouTube soon. But I have virtual webinars, seminars I'm going to do 4 times this next year. So the first one's coming up January 10th. So you could sign up for the wait list on my website, which is you can find in my profile.
Really exciting. And we'll have the seminar linked below as well, your website linked below. Kim, again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for accepting our invitation, and hopefully we can talk again with you in the
Yeah,
future.
thank you. It was my pleasure. It was really nice meeting you.
Thank you.